Evan Miller is my husband. His blindness had made him volatile and cruel, and he was always trying to hurt himself, starving himself, anything to end his life. So I told him, the Davis family has everything ready. The second you die, they're taking me in. His teeth chattered with rage. If I die, he roared, I'm taking you with me. But the next day, the untouched tray of food I brought him was scraped clean. Mr. Quinn, the housekeeper, said, running over to me. Mr. Miller knocked over his food again. I wasn't surprised. That scene played out 100 times a day in this house. Has he eaten anything today? I asked. No, not even a drop of water. I nodded. I put down my trowel, went to my room to wash my hands, and then headed toward Evan's bedroom. He hadn't left it once since he went blind. What's all the fuss about? I asked as I walked in, seeing the food scattered across the floor. I knelt to pick it up. Get out, Evan said. He was sitting in a chair by the window, his back to me. I will. But can you please eat something first? Evan let out a humorless laugh. It's not like I'm going to die. You people always find a way to keep me alive. So why bother pretending to care by bringing me food every day? He was right. Even if he didn't eat, the Miller family's doctor would just put him on an 4-drip. Evan Miller wasn't going to die that easily. Evan and I got married 3 months ago. We went overseas to make it official. He was already blind when we got married. 6 months ago, Evan got into a race car accident. He survived, but he lost his sight. When his family came to me, they offered to pay off my $80 million debt. The condition was that I had to marry Evan. Apparently, a psychic had told them our stars were aligned and that I could save his life. I think the psychic got it wrong. From the first day I met Evan, he never once looked at me with anything but scorn. His blindness had made him volatile and erratic. Right after he lost his sight, he tried to end his life in at least 5 different ways. But his family always found him and saved him. After that, they removed anything from the house that Evan could use to hurt himself. So he started starving himself. But the Miller family doctor would just force-feed him within 4. He couldn't die that way either. After months of this, he only grew more volatile, turning the whole house upside down. How much did they pay you? Evan asked me while I was bathing him. I started bathing him during the 2nd month of our marriage. He refused at first. Needing someone else to wash him was a crushing blow to his already fragile ego. But he had no choice. He'd been blind for months but still couldn't accept it. He certainly wasn't going to patiently learn how to navigate a world without light. He was always clattering and banging around in the bathroom, knocking things over. One day, he even slipped and ended up sprawled out on the floor. After that day, I started bathing him. A lot, I answered. Evan always had a way of looking down his nose at people. Now that you've suddenly got all that money, do you even know how to spend it? Here was a man who was so hopeless he didn't even want to live, yet he still had the energy to be sarcastic. Why don't you teach me? A smirk played on his lips. You people will do anything for money, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. I didn't feel like engaging, so I just kept washing him. After a moment of silence, his expression suddenly darkened. He lowered his voice. If that's the case, can you kill me? I have a lot of money. I can give it all to you, he said, his voice pleading and full of despair. Looking at his face, drained of all color, I opened my mouth. But no words came out. Since marrying Evan, his family would occasionally take me to social events. They said I needed to get familiar with their social class so I could help Evan manage family affairs in the future. To be honest, the Millers were good to me. To put it bluntly, they'd bought me, but the fact they still made this much effort meant a lot. Tonight's event was a high-end cocktail party, and all the VIPs were there. After Evan's parents introduced me to a few people, they told me to go look around on my own. Well, a voice said from behind me as I was debating whether to grab a pastry. If it isn't Evan Miller's new husband. I turned to see the Davis family's youngest son. Spencer, I think his name was. I didn't know these rich kids well, but I'd heard that Spencer was into men and had a reputation for playing the field. More importantly, he and Evan were bitter rivals. Hello, I said politely. I remember you. Oliver Quinn, right? He leaned in with a sleazy smile. You know, when I heard you were marrying Evan, I looked up your picture. You're my type. Ever consider being with me? Evan's blind. He's no fun. And his temper is awful. No thanks, I said, taking a step back. Think about it, he pressed. I'll give you more than Evan ever could. You won't regret it. It was late when I got back from the party. Did Evan eat anything today? I asked the housekeeper while changing my shoes. No, she replied. What did he do today? He just sat by the window. Ever since the accident, Evan only ever occupied two places. His bed and the chair by the window. I see. When I entered his bedroom, I was greeted by the same sight. His back turned to the room. In the dim light, he looked incredibly lonely. You're still awake? I asked. He didn't answer, acting as if I wasn't there. I walked over and started clearing away the bowls beside him. The food inside was still untouched. Still not eating? He remained silent. I stood there for a moment watching him and then said, I ran into Spencer Davis today. Evan's expression didn't change. He said he really likes me and that he'd give me more than you do. He said the second you die, he'll take me in. At that, Evan's face turned ugly. You probably don't know this, but I'm not bad looking. I don't have a shortage of admirers. Once you're gone, there won't be a place for me in the Miller family anyway. The Davis family has a lot of money. Finally, his teeth began to chatter with rage. He cut me off sharply. Oliver Quinn, don't even think about it. If I die, I'm taking you with me. I ignored him and walked out with the tray. Get back here. He started screaming hysterically. Spencer Davis, I'll make you pay. I'm not even dead. And you're already hoping he'll be a widower. That night, Evan's cursing echoed through Seacliff Estates for hours. The next day, I had to go with Evan's parents to look at a piece of land. I didn't understand any of it, so I mostly just tagged along to fill a spot. But before we left, Mr. Miller stopped me. Oliver, he said, go home and think about this property. Decide if we should buy it. Whether we buy it and at what price, I'm leaving it all up to you. Mr. Miller was Evan's father. I was caught off guard, but I could only nod. It was getting late by the time I got home. As usual, I put my things down and went to Evan's room. He was sitting in his chair by the window again, staring blankly. He didn't move when he heard the door open. I sighed and walked over, intending to clear the dinner tray beside him. But when I got closer, I was stunned. For the past 6 months, the food had always come back out the same way it went in. But today, the plate was completely clean. I really didn't know if the land Mr. Miller told me about was a good investment. But he definitely knew. He was just telling me to think about it to test and train me. I understood that. But I truly didn't know the first thing about this stuff. After a few days of mulling it over, I got nowhere. So I decided to ask Evan. I thought you were so capable, he scoffed. What are you coming to me for? When did I ever say I was capable? I felt wronged. Getting them to find you was pretty capable. And it wasn't just them. There was also... He trailed off, pressing his lips together and turning his face away. I didn't know what he was about to say, but from the look on his face, I knew he wasn't going to help me. I couldn't be careless with a property worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Since Evan wouldn't help, I had to rely on myself. I researched everywhere. I scouted the location in person. I even pulled up some past case files from the company. But the more I looked, the more my head spun. In the end, I couldn't make sense of any of it. I came home very late those few days. A week later, I didn't get home until almost midnight. When I opened the door, I saw a dark, blurry figure in the living room. It was standing motionless in the center of the room. My heart leaped into my throat. Before I could figure out if it was a burglar or a ghost, I heard Evan's cold voice. What? I'm not dead yet, and you're already so eager to get out that you don't even want to come home. I breathed a sigh of relief. Ignoring his jab, I just said, "Oh, it's you. Who else would it be? Spencer Davis?" I was exhausted and didn't want to fight with him. I was out looking at the property. I've been at the company with Mr. Duncan and the others learning the ropes these past few days. You know Mr. Duncan, he's a great guy. He's teaching me everything he can. I thought my explanation was clear enough, but Evan started in with his sarcastic tone again. So you're blaming me for not teaching you? Why was he acting like such a child? No, even a child wasn't this petty. I didn't mean that, I answered patiently. It's just that I really don't know anything. I need someone to help me. After I spoke, the room fell silent for a long time. Then, he felt his way back to his room in the dark. The next day, as I was about to head out, Evan's personal driver stopped me. Mr. Quinn, Mr. Miller said you'll be riding with us today. The question formed in my mind. Aside from a few trips to the hospital, Evan hadn't left the house since his accident. His driver was almost always idle. His old car had been parked in the driveway for so long it was covered in a layer of dust. I didn't overthink it and followed the driver to the car. He opened the door for me. To my surprise, Evan was sitting inside. You? I was so shocked I was at a loss for words. Hurry up, Evan urged impatiently, his voice a low growl. Once I was in, the car pulled smoothly onto the main road. At first, I didn't know where we were going. Seeing the sour look on Evan's face, I decided against asking. After a while, the scenery started to look familiar. I realized we were on the road leading to the property, but we just drove past it. After driving for quite a while longer, the car finally stopped at Ridgeview Point. Evan got out and started walking on his own. I rushed to support him. What do you see? He asked as we walked. What? I didn't understand. Looking down from here, that piece of land. What can you tell me about it? He explained patiently. It finally clicked. It's desolate, I replied. This area isn't developed, right? What else? I wasn't sure. I hesitated for a moment before saying, but we could hold on to it. Maybe. You idiot. You think you're stocking up on rice for the pantry? He cut me off without ceremony. I knew I had no vision, so I shut up. Evan gazed at the land for a long time before sighing. You have to ride the wave, understand? For the next hour, he explained what it meant to ride the wave in business. He spoke eloquently and confidently, his analysis of the land's pros and cons crystal clear. I'd heard that Evan had studied at a top 10 business school, but it had just been a story. At that moment, the concept became real. On the way back, we rode in silence again. But I was truly grateful to him. As I got out of the car, I said, Evan, thank you. He paused for a fraction of a second, then felt his way into the house without a word. In the end, we decided to buy the land. It was only after we made the decision that I learned Spencer Davis was one of our competitors. We prepared multiple bidding strategies and consulted with the company's senior executives before settling on a final price. I went to the auction with Mr. Duncan. As soon as we walked into the hall, I saw Spencer looking like he had it in the bag. Have you thought about my offer? He asked, walking up to me. I pretended not to know what he was talking about and walked past him. There were a lot of people there. It was a highly anticipated property. So even with Mr. Duncan by my side, I was a nervous wreck. Spencer was staring daggers at me from a short distance away, sending a chill down my spine. But just as I was getting lost in my anxiety, someone sat down next to me. I turned my head and saw it was Evan. What are you doing here? I asked, completely surprised. After his accident, he hated being around strangers. But Evan didn't answer. He just sat there quietly, a look of impatience still on his face. He's probably worried I'll mess it up, I guessed. We won the land, just as we'd hoped. I helped Evan on the way out. He wasn't familiar with the place, so we walked slowly. Just as we reached the lobby, someone called out to him from behind. I turned and saw it was Spencer again. Evan, my man, what are you doing here in person? He said, his tone feigning concern. But I could see the pure provocation on his face, a mix of mockery and some unearned sense of superiority. Evan didn't respond and kept walking. You should stay home if you're having trouble getting around, Spencer said, shamelessly following us. It's so crowded in here. Someone might bump into you or worse, step on you. That wouldn't be good. He let out a little chuckle. Evan's face went deathly pale. I'd heard the stories. Their rivalry stemmed from Spencer always being in Evan's shadow since they were kids. He could never accept it and was always looking for a chance to turn the tables. It looked like he'd finally found his opportunity. Oliver, he said, turning to me now, have you thought about what I said last time? He deliberately made it sound ambiguous. You should really consider it. He doesn't need to, Evan cut in without hesitation. And, I said, switching my grip from supporting Evan's arm to holding his hand, Evan can go wherever he wants. It's none of your business. But my defense didn't earn me any gratitude from Evan. When we got home that day, he locked himself in the bathroom. I waited outside, listening to the sound of the shower running for almost an hour. When the door finally opened, he walked out with a look of indescribable despair. He pushed away my hand when I tried to help him. Then he went back to his bedroom and locked himself inside. For many days after that, Evan reverted to how he was right after the accident. He refused to eat or drink, trying to waste away until there was nothing left. After we bought the land, Mr. Miller put me in charge of the development phase. I got busier. With business comes a lot of schmoozing. One day I went out for a dinner meeting, and it happened to be just me. And by an even greater coincidence, I ran into Spencer Davis at the same event. But strangely, he wasn't persistent this time. You can't force things, he said, walking over with a glass of wine. If that's how it is, let's just be friends. I didn't suspect a thing and even breathed a silent sigh of relief. I never imagined I was walking into a trap. After all, who would have thought Spencer would be bold enough to pull something in a public setting like that? When I woke up, my head was fuzzy. I shifted slightly and realized I was tied up. I looked around and saw I was in an abandoned factory, probably on the outskirts of the city. You're awake? That's when I saw Spencer standing nearby. You did this? I asked. Of course, he said nonchalantly. Then, ignoring my struggles, he pulled out his phone and made a call. The other end picked up quickly, and I heard a familiar voice. Evan Miller, Spencer said. I'll get straight to the point. Give me the land. And Oliver Quinn is mine, too. Evan was silent on the other end for a few seconds, then asked in a flat tone, and if I don't? Spencer sneered. You will. Why? You wouldn't want the Miller Corporation to have such a huge scandal, would you? You should know Oliver is in my hands. But Evan seemed to let out a soft laugh. Then he said, Spencer, I'm a blind man. What do I care about a scandal at the Miller Corporation? How am I supposed to see it? Hearing this, Spencer's face darkened for a moment. Evan's reaction was not what he'd expected. Is that so? He quickly recovered. Evan Miller, you really are content to be a useless waste. But before he could finish, the flimsy factory door was kicked open. I recognized the men who walked in. They were the Miller family's bodyguards. When I was brought back home, Evan was sitting by the window again. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. How did you know? I asked, walking over to him. It was obvious, he said, as if it were nothing. Anyone with half a brain could have seen what he was planning. So he had arranged for people to watch over me beforehand, even when he was in such a dark place himself. In that moment, I thought Evan was incredible. He was a master strategist like the ones you read about in textbooks. Evan, you're amazing, I said with genuine admiration. He stiffened, and for some reason, a look of embarrassment and discomfort crossed his face. I ignored it and decided to seize the opportunity. Then, can you help me? I really think this company stuff is too hard. He opened his mouth, looking like he was about to refuse. I quickly cut him off. Please? I had discovered that Evan was all bark and no bite. He didn't say anything in the end, just let out a quiet Evan hadn't been to the office in a long time. The familiar surroundings probably brought back painful memories. After sitting down in his old office chair, he suddenly became very sad. The hand he'd raised to touch the keyboard froze in mid-air and then retreated. I saw it happen. I walked over, took his hand, and placed it on the keyboard. It was a special keyboard for visually impaired users that I had installed earlier. I had even switched the computer to a screen reader mode. The moment he touched it, he seemed stunned, as if he couldn't believe he could still operate something like this. It made sense. He had never accepted his blindness, so naturally, he wouldn't have looked into things that could help him live a better life. But ideals are one thing, and reality is another. It was his first time using it, and he wasn't very good. He quickly lost his patience. After messing up a simple spreadsheet for the 10th time, he finally snapped. He swept everything off the desk. When I came back from my meeting, I found the room in a total mess and a man slumped in his chair, defeated. I could guess what had happened. I went over, picked up the scattered items and put them back in place. Then I said, "Evan, you have such a temper. Who on earth could put up with you for a lifetime? If you can't, then get out," he started yelling again. Sometimes, I felt like he was a lion that had lost its way. Fierce, but actually very fragile. "How can I get out?" I said with a smile. "I'm already sold to you, aren't I? Looks like I'm stuck with you for life." "What, you sound reluctant?" he asked. "Not at all," I said, leaning down and placing his hand back on the reassembled keyboard. "At your service, Mr. Miller." His fingertips twitched, but he didn't say anything more. His expression seemed to soften considerably. It took him 2 weeks, but he finally got used to the new keyboard and screen reader. My main job was to oversee the development of the land we'd bought. But since I didn't know anything, I had to ask him for help every time. Gradually, he had essentially taken my place and become the backbone of the project. It was only then that I finally saw the real Evan at work. When I first heard he'd gotten into a racing accident, I had assumed he was just some rich playboy. But I never expected he was the bona fide heir to the corporation. "You're secretly judging me, aren't you?" Evan suddenly asked, pulling me from my thoughts. "I'm not," I said quickly. "You used to think I was just some spoiled rich kid who only knew how to party, didn't you? This guy, was he a mind reader?" "No," I answered, feeling a little guilty. But Evan smiled. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile. The feeling was special. "What about you?" he asked, turning the question on me. "What? Aren't you going to tell me about yourself?" I was at a loss for words. There wasn't much to tell. When the Miller family found me, I was drowning in $80 million of debt. "Why did you owe so much money?" Evan asked while trying to cut his own steak. Lately, we had been commuting to and from work together. Sometimes we'd go straight home, where the housekeeper would have dinner ready. But occasionally, we'd eat out, like today. Evan said we might as well grab a bite nearby. So we came to the steakhouse he used to like. It was my dad's debt. Evan frowned, confused. He racked it up gambling. "Then why did they come after you for it?" "Because he's dead." Now Evan's face was a knot of confusion. "You wouldn't understand," I said. "You've probably never had debt collectors after you. As long as someone in the family is alive, they'll come for you. So what did you do before?" "You don't know?" Now it was my turn to be shocked. "How would I know?" he asked as if it were obvious. "Mr. Miller, you really are generous. You didn't even care what kind of person you were marrying." He pouted but didn't say anything. He really looked like a little kid sometimes. "I played the cello," I said. He seemed a bit surprised. "Surprising, right? That someone from my kind of background would play the cello." "That's not what I meant," he said, a rare hint of guilt in his voice. "It's fine," I said. "My grandfather taught me. He was a very famous cellist." He nodded, lost in thought. We talked late into the night that day. On the ride home, I started to get drowsy. My head kept drooping. In a daze, I felt someone steady my forehead and gently pull my head to the side. It seemed to be raining outside. I could hear the patter of drops on the window. A long time later, I finally woke up. I opened my eyes and saw we were home. I was leaning on Evan's shoulder. His coat was draped over me. It was the middle of the night. "Why didn't you wake me?" I said, sitting up. "It's fine. We weren't in a hurry," was all he said. After that, I noticed Evan seemed to have a lot more patience. I guessed he had finally accepted that I wasn't cut out for this and decided to let me off the hook. The company decided to build a large shopping mall on the land we had bought. Without realizing it, Evan became very busy. But because he couldn't see, many things were inconvenient for him. So I had to stay by his side constantly, like a personal assistant. 2 weeks later, he had to attend another cocktail party. It was his first formal business event since losing his sight. I went with him as always. Everything at the party was normal. No one seemed to find his blindness particularly noteworthy. He handled the networking gracefully, recognizing people by their voices and speaking with perfect poise. But halfway through the event, a waiter accidentally spilled wine on him. "I'll take you to get that cleaned up," I said, quickly putting down my things. Evan didn't say anything and followed me to the restroom. He always kept a spare set of clothes in the car for important occasions. I went to get his clothes from the car and then started helping him change. I'd seen him without clothes before, since I was the one who bathed him. But suddenly, in a different place, in such a small space, as I tied his tie, I could feel his breath on my ear. The atmosphere in the restroom became a little charged. Neither of us knew what to say. After we looked at each other like that for a long time, I heard Evan seem to let out a soft sigh. Oliver, he called my name. Yeah. But he didn't say anything else. We had to go back to the family estate for Evan's grandmother's 70th birthday. I had only met his grandmother once at our wedding. Seeing her again, the kind old woman took my hand and asked if Evan had been bullying me. Evan sat nearby, his face visibly darkening. No, I said. Grandma, he's been great. Great? What's so great about him? The old woman waved her hand. He has such a temper. I thought he'd never find a husband in his life. Evan's expression soured even more. No, I said with another smile. He's really wonderful. He's brilliant at his job, so capable. And he learns so quickly. Look, Grandma, he can even walk by himself now. The old woman was pleased to hear it. She gave us a few more words of advice before letting us go to our room. At our own house, Evan and I slept in separate rooms. Here, we had to sleep together. I stared at the large bed, unsure of what to do. We had never slept in the same bed before. After a quick wash, I lay down. Evan's father had called him away to talk, and he didn't come back until very late. Then I heard noises from the bathroom for a while. A little later, I felt the mattress dip beside me as he lay down. We both lay there stiffly, not moving a muscle. After a long time, I started to feel uncomfortable and turned over. Still awake? Evan's voice came from the darkness. Yeah, I paused. Why are you still awake? But the reason was probably obvious. He was probably not used to having someone in bed with him either. Oliver, he said after a moment of silence. If you had the choice, what do you think you'd be doing right now? I didn't expect him to ask that. I thought for a moment before answering. Maybe I'd be playing the cello. You really love the cello? Of course, I said, turning over again to face him. My dream since I was a kid was to join a world-class orchestra. He seemed to chuckle softly, turning his face slightly toward me. We fell asleep in that position that night. By the time the project was on track, Evan had completely adapted to a world without light. He could walk a good distance on his own with a cane and hadn't lost his temper in a long time. Everyone was thrilled. But in the midst of this happy atmosphere, I received divorce papers from him. Along with them was an offer letter from a top orchestra. Evan, I didn't know what to say. You don't owe me anything. Oliver, I was very happy to have met you, I heard him say. And just like that, our 8-month marriage came to an end. It was a marriage without feelings, after all, so the separation was clean. As a divorce gift, I accepted the orchestra's invitation. The orchestra toured all over the world, so I left Bayport and started traveling everywhere with my cello. For a long time, I didn't see Evan. I didn't contact him either, but I saw him in the news. The headlines were all about how the blind heir of the Miller Corporation was conquering the business world. A true titan of industry. He really was amazing, I thought to myself. It was the 5th day of the orchestra's tour in Sri Lanka. Exactly 1 year had passed since my divorce from Evan. Sri Lanka was warm then, unlike the cold, damp winter back home. I drew the hotel curtains, ready to rest, when my phone buzzed with a text. Oliver, good night. But when I opened my phone, the message was gone. In its place in our chat history was the last goodbye Evan had sent a year ago. The time on my phone read 11 p.m. Back home, it would have been 1 a.m. I returned to Bayport 3 months after receiving that message. The orchestra was doing a domestic tour. Bayport was one of the stops and the first one. It was my first time performing with the orchestra in my home country. It was impossible not to be nervous. While getting ready backstage, my palms were sweating. As I was fidgeting anxiously, someone came in with a bouquet of flowers. Excuse me, is there a Mr. Oliver Quinn here? That's me, I said, going over. The person handed me the flowers. saying someone had asked them to deliver them and that I needed to sign. Almost no one knew I was back. I had no idea who would send me flowers. And the card on the bouquet only had 2 words: break a leg. I still hadn't figured out who sent the flowers by the end of the performance. But as I stood for the final bow, I saw a familiar figure in the audience. A year and 3 months had passed. Evan hadn't changed at all. He sat in a corner, looking toward the stage. I couldn't see him clearly, but I still felt like I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into a slight smile. There were 5 performances in the country in total. For the next 4, I received a bouquet of flowers before each show. And during the curtain call, I would see that familiar figure sitting in the corner. But he never once came to talk to me, and I never went over to him. Just like that message, sent and retracted in the middle of the night. He never explained, and I never asked. After the last stop, I was heading to Italy with the orchestra. The hotel was on the riverfront. It was early spring by then, but the river was still cold, and the wind had a biting chill. I stared at the dark, quiet water for a long time, thinking about the past month. I didn't know when I'd be back again, or when I'd see Evan again. A strange feeling crept into my heart. And in that strange state, my eyes scanned the ground below and caught sight of a figure. I only needed one glance to know who it was. I didn't know how Evan had followed me here again, or why he was waiting there. But I didn't want to guess anymore. I grabbed my phone and rushed downstairs. As I walked toward Evan, I could feel myself trembling. "Come upstairs with me," I said. But when I took his hand, there was no hesitation in my voice. He was clearly stunned and confused as to how I had spotted him. "Oliver." I ignored him and pulled him straight back into the hotel. He kept calling my name the whole way, as if trying to pull free. Once we were inside the room, I asked, "I thought it was Oliver now?" The light in the doorway was dim, but I could see his neck flush red. "So what's the deal?" I asked again. "Sending flowers, coming to my shows, following me everywhere I go. What does it all mean?" Evan didn't speak. Though his beautiful eyes had lost their color, I could see a flicker of panic in them at that moment. "Say something," I said, my temper rising. "If you don't, we're never seeing each other again. Never." Before he could finish, a pair of warm lips pressed against mine. "Don't say that," he said. It was the first time I had ever heard Evan speak in such a tone. Like a lost puppy. "Then why did you divorce me?" I finally asked the question I'd been wanting to ask for over a year. "I wouldn't be a good husband," he said. I thought I understood what he meant. There was no point in asking more. He held me in the doorway for a long time. But all he said was, "Oliver, you need to think this through." "Think what through?" I asked him. "Think about whether you want to accept a husband who's blind." As he said this, his voice trembled. "That stuff." I wanted to say that none of it mattered to me, but he cut me off. "Oliver," he said, his hand on the back of my neck. "I have a blood clot in my brain. It's pressing on my optic nerve. They can't operate because it's too close to an artery. The doctor said the only hope is that the clot dissolves on its own one day. But do you know what the chances of that are? 1 in a million. As he spoke, his grip tightened slightly. Just recounting the near-zero probability of regaining his sight seemed to make him relive the moment he went from light to darkness. Suddenly, I could feel his hand trembling again, and his heart beating fast and erratically, like a rabbit trapped in an endless, empty field, completely helpless. So I might really be blind for the rest of my life. The blood clot might never dissolve. There are so many things I can't do. I listened quietly. When he finished, I was silent for a moment before asking, "Then why are you still holding me?" His body went rigid. He said in a shaky voice, "Because I missed you so much. I went to Italy with the orchestra. Evan told me to think things through carefully." I agreed. I could understand how he felt. He probably felt that a decision made after long and careful consideration would give him more security. The orchestra's schedule was packed during that time, and with the time difference between us, we still rarely talked. I only saw from the news that he had officially taken over the Miller Corporation, and that the board of directors and shareholders had no objections. So, Evan really was amazing. By the time the orchestra reached Florence, it was almost early summer back home. So when Evan showed up at my door that day, he was wearing a simple white short-sleeved shirt. He looked a bit like a student just starting out. "Didn't you tell me to think it over?" I asked at the door. He walked in, closed the door, and pulled me into his arms. "So, have you thought it through?" he asked, his voice muffled in my neck. I didn't answer. I led him to the window. "Evan, the sun is about to set in Florence."
Yeah.
He sounded a little dejected, probably because he hadn't gotten his answer. "It's about," I said, taking his hand and guiding it this big. "The color is golden yellow. But today's sun is a bit paler than usual. There are some dark clouds in the north. Very faint, like a veil over the horizon. Can you picture it like that?" He hesitated for a moment before saying, "I think I can." I let go of his hand and then asked, "So I want to ask you, have you thought it through?" It was only then that he suddenly understood what I meant. "Oliver," he said, his voice choking up, "I might never get better." "I know." I wiped a tear from the corner of his eye and then kissed him. Evan paused for a second, then pulled me closer. As night began to fall in Florence, we shared our first real kiss. By the time I returned to the country again, another 2 months had passed. The orchestra schedule wasn't so tight that I couldn't come back for a year. The reason I hadn't returned for over a year before was because I felt there was no place for me back home anymore. Coming back to the house I had shared with Evan, everything felt familiar. I hadn't told him when I was coming back, so when I lay down in bed after my shower, he jumped. But he quickly realized it was me and pulled me into his arms. "Honey," he'd started calling me that last month, "you don't even tell me when you're coming home anymore." His tone was playfully pitiful. I slapped away his wandering hands and said seriously, "I have to come back to check up on you, don't I? And what did you find?" I thought for a moment. "I found out Mr. Miller has been up to no good." "What kind of no good?" "You figure it out. Trying to bait me, are you? Using that on your own husband." He gave me a sharp, playful bite. Tickled, and I couldn't stop laughing. We cuddled for a bit and then he said, "From now on, tell me wherever you go and when you're coming home. You're on your own out there. I worry." There was a loquat tree in the yard. It was already bearing fruit. I remembered planting it on the day Evan had thrown his bowl, a year ago. I didn't know if he knew I had planted a loquat tree here. I picked one and ate it. It was quite sweet. As I was lost in thought, Evan came up from behind and wrapped his arms around me. Then, something cool and metallic slipped onto my ring finger. "When did you buy this?" I asked. "The day you left." "What? After the divorce?" "The day you left," he repeated. "Why did you buy it then?" He gently stroked the ring, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. I had to give myself something to hold on to. Otherwise, how was I supposed to keep going? My heart ached. I turned around and hugged him tightly. Suddenly, I remembered the first time I saw Evan. He was sitting by the window with his back to the door. In profile, his handsome face, which should have been full of life, was shrouded in endless gloom. In that moment, something in my heart was stirred, and from then on it never stopped.